What's up, everybody? It is Dan Cam, and I am back with another video. And ladies and gentlemen, the time has finally come. One of the most requested videos that I've gotten to make on my channel. Today, we are going to be installing this Corsair H60, and it is a 120mm AIO. And I'm going to show you a full tutorial on how to put it into your HP Omen 25L or 30L. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's get into it. All right, guys, so a few quick notes before we get into the install. The Corsair H60 has a 3-pin fan connector, and it also has a SATA power connector in order to properly power it. So on HP Omens, the second hard drive that the majority of them have is a 3.5-inch mechanical, and that's the one in the top hard drive cage. But in the bottom cage, there are 2 free cables, and one of them is a SATA data cable, and one of them is a SATA power cable, and it's usually labeled P5. And you're gonna need that cable labeled P5 in order to properly power this AIO. So if you're utilizing a third hard drive that uses that cable, you will not be able to use the Corsair H60. So you'd either have to get a different power supply that has more SATA power connectors, or you'd have to remove that hard drive, and you'll need that cable labeled P5 to power this bad boy. So I didn't know that until I got this AIO, which is kind of a bummer, but I just want to let you guys know that before you go out and buy this and attempt to install it and you don't have a free SATA power connector. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is if you're planning on going out and buying a Corsair H60 and you plan to follow along with this tutorial, I'm gonna have my Amazon affiliation links down in the description, and purchasing through those links goes to help to support the channel. But I just wanna say thank you guys so much for all of your support recently, and I really hope you find this tutorial useful. And if you have any questions or concerns, please comment down below as I answer almost all of my comments. But without further ado, let's get into the tutorial and let's get into what you'll need. All right, guys, let's go ahead and go over everything that you're going to need. And the first tool that you're going to need is a Torx T15 socket. And this is going to be used to remove the factory air cooler bolts. It's held in with 4 T15 screws. And this one's a 3/8 drive. So I have mine hooked up to a 3/8 ratchet, but they come in all different forms. And once again, I'll have everything linked down in the description. You're going to need a Phillips #2 screwdriver. This is great for the motherboard screws and the GPU screws. And then you're also going to need a Phillips head #1 screwdriver. And I use magnetic tip screwdrivers because it just makes your life so much easier and screws don't fall off. And this is for the Wi-Fi card and the screws that hold the stock 80mm fan to the air cooler. Then you're going to need some isopropyl alcohol, and this is going to be used to clean off your CPU. And then to do that, you're going to spray this onto some paper towels, and I use these shop paper towels. They don't leave any residue, and they're used for, you know, shop-related purposes. Mechanics use them all the time. They're fantastic, so I recommend using these over regular paper towels because they don't leave any residue. And then I would highly recommend keeping your manual nearby. I'm going to go ahead and go over everything that you're going to need that comes with the kit. But just in case you need to refer to the manual, let me see if I can get this back page. It shows you everything that you'll need, and it shows you the Intel side, which is what we'll need because all Omens are Intel spacing. So it shows you exactly what you're going to need. So keep that nearby. And then the last tool that you're going to need is these non-marring plastic pry tools. So these are great for removing the stock CPU cooler backing plate. And make sure you're not using anything metal to remove that, because you do have a chance of scratching the motherboard. So I use these plastic tools that work great, but some people use a blow dryer to heat up the adhesive in the back, and I'll show you that later on how that is. But these worked fantastic for me. And then I'd also recommend these little magnetic trays. A lot of the screws we're going to be dealing with are very small, so it's nice to keep them organized. So I have 4 of these guys. And then as far as the AIO itself, we're going to need these 4 small screws right here, and those are going to be used to secure the bracket to the radiator. And then these spacers are actually going to go on them like that. And then we're going to need these, and this is going to connect to our new backing plate that we're going to be installing. And it's that one right there that comes with the kit. And then we're going to need these screws, and these screws are going to secure the fan into the radiator. These 4 longer screws, and then these 4 screws are going to secure the pump onto the backing plate. And my camera doesn't like to focus today. And then obviously you'll need your pump, and let's see if I can flip this over. The pump does come with a nice cover, and it does come with pre-applied thermal paste, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. And then other than that, I think that's all the tools that you're going to need. All right, so we're going to start with disassembly, and we've got the graphics card connectors, and they have these little tabs on them that you're going to squeeze while pulling out. And then next is the sag bracket, and that's going to be 1 screw that holds it in. And for my sag bracket, it just slides up and then it slides out. And then we're going to remove the 2 screws at the back for the graphics card that secures it to the case. And there is the bottom one. And now we're going to move on to the top one. And to remove the graphics card on your motherboard, you have this little tab that you're going to be pressing down while you're pulling the graphics card up and out. So it's kind of one motion. So push the tab down and pull the graphics card up, and it should come out very easily. And you're going to want to take a lot of before pictures. And I like to do it when the graphics card out, because you have a clear view of the motherboard. So just take a picture of each corner of your motherboard so you have a reference picture just in case you get confused when you're reassembling. And there is the top left and the fan connections and the CPU connection up there. And then make sure you take note of the LED positive and negative and the power switch positive and negative, because those are very important. Those only go in one way. And then there's an overall view of the motherboard, just in case we get confused on reassembly. So now we're going to start removing connectors, and there is the system fan, and that is for my rear fan. And then the CPU connector right there is the same as a graphics card. It's got the little tab. You're going to squeeze it and pull out. And then now we're moving on to the LED positive and negative, the power switch. There is the light bar. There is the front USB 3. And then what we're going to try to do is just get these out of the way as best as possible, because we're going to be pulling the motherboard out. And then I also got the hard drive SATA cable that's there. And then next is the front panel connector, audio connector. And then here's the 24-pin motherboard, and that has the little tab that you're going to have to squeeze. And then next is your Wi-Fi card, aka your Bluetooth module as well, and that's got 1 really tiny screw. And then the card is just going to slide out. And don't be worried if the 2 antennae become loose from there. You can go ahead and reattach those later. But now we're going to move on to the CPU cooler fan, and they're held in with these 4 black screws, not the silver ones. So we're going to go ahead and get the fan off. And I like doing this when the motherboard is bolted down so it doesn't move. So we get these 4 loosened. And then since the CPU cooler fan is unplugged, we can just go ahead and get this last screw and then pull it out. And there's the stock fan. So now we're going to go ahead and remove the cooler. And I like to do it, like I said, when the motherboard's bolted in, and you're going to need your Torx T15. And then I've had mine loosened many times, so yours may fight you a little bit more on loosening them, but just go ahead and loosen it evenly on each corner. And it's going to feel like you're kind of unthreading forever because they actually have a spring on them that keeps them in place. So just keep unscrewing it, keep unscrewing it. And you'll kind of feel like you're it's never ending, but just make sure they're as loose as possible. And then when the time comes, you're just going to grab the cooler, and I recommend with both hands, and you're going to kind of wiggle it and pull up at the same time. And it's a little bit easier if your computer is actually warmed up, so it's actually a good idea to have your computer running for a little bit and then attempt this. But it should just pull up, and you can get that piece of garbage out of there. So now we're going to move on to the 8 screws that secure the motherboard to the case. And they're all outlined in orange, as you can see. And I'm not sure if all HP motherboards are like this, but this one is. All the screws that have that orange outline around them secure the motherboard to the case. So let's get all 8 of these out of the way. And then once these are out, we can go ahead and remove the motherboard because nothing's plugged in anymore. All the cables are free. And then the motherboard's going to fight you a little bit coming out, so don't be afraid to kind of give it a good wiggle. And you can see in the bottom left there is where it's getting caught. You can see how it's just stuck there, but with a little bit of wiggling, you're going to go ahead and be able to pop it free. Boom, there it was. So let's go ahead and put the motherboard to the side. And then since we don't need the case right now, let's go ahead and get this out of the way and bring the motherboard back. So now is going to be the toughest part of this whole job, and it's removing the stock CPU cooler bracket. And this bracket has 2 pieces of adhesive, one right there and one right there, and that's what you're going to be fighting. But what you're going to do, the easiest way is to get your plastic pry tool and just kind of keep prying at the corners until you find a good spot where you can get it to slide in, and just work at it and work at it and work at it. And it's going to fight you, but it will come loose. Just make sure you're not using anything metal. And then I'll show you when I originally did this. I'll leave a link in the top right for my original removal of this. Mine came out super easily because I've had it out like 4 times now. But there's the 2 pieces of adhesive that keep it in place. So now we're going to grab our new cooler backing plate, and you can see these slide in and out. So if you find that it's not fitting properly, you can slide these forward and back to get the proper fit. Because at first I thought I had the wrong backing plate, but you can see I just kind of squeeze it and get it to fall in place. So now while we're holding the cooler backing plate, we're going to flip it back over and put it back down. And then you can see all of the holes match up with the motherboard. And so now we're going to get these standoffs, and we're going to screw all of them in the 4 corners. And then these don't have to be super tight. There's no tool used to tighten them, but you're just going to want to make sure they're a really good finger tight. And your cooler backing plate may move before you get these in, so just make sure it's positioned properly before you get these screwed in. So we go ahead and get those all tightened down with my fingers. And you can see there's a little bit of a gap. There is adhesive on the back of the cooler backing plate, but it's actually not going to make contact, so I didn't use it. But now it's time to clean the CPU, and we're going to get our rag. And I like to spray the alcohol on the rag, and I like to do one quick swipe like that. Then I fold it over, get another clean part of it, swipe it again, and then get another clean part. Because if you just keep using the same part. You're just kind of smearing it. So create a new clean part of the paper towel and just keep cleaning it until the CPU doesn't have any residue on it. And then use a dry part of it to get everything off, but the alcohol will dry really quick. So now we're going to move the bracket that's at the top of the case, and that is held in with 2 small Phillips head screws. And I would honestly recommend removing the rear fan before you attempt all this, and I'll show you why later, but it kind of gets in the way of mounting this back up. And then when you get your Omen, you're going to have 4 squares in there, and you're just going to have to push those out, and that will create the airflow through the radiator. So now let's go ahead and grab our radiator and pump and all of the accessories I showed you earlier, the long screws, short screws, the spacers, and your little Phillips head screws over there to the left. And on your fan, it's going to show you the orientation. That shows you which way that the air is going to blow. And we want this to be an exhaust fan, so we want it facing upward. So let's grab our long screws and secure that to the radiator. And let's get all 4 of them in there. Because we want the fan blowing through the radiator and up and out of the case. So it's considered an exhaust fan. And then these just have to be snug. They don't have to be super tight. But if they are loose and the fan's going, it probably will rattle a little bit. So just make sure those are nice and snug. So after those are snug, we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab our bracket and secure the radiator to the bracket. And I'd highly recommend not doing it how I did it. I held it with one hand for, you know, recording purposes, but this was very difficult. So I'd recommend leaving it on your work surface and screwing these in, because holding both of these and getting the spacer on the screw was not easy, but I ended up getting it in. So there's 1. And there's 2. And then once again, these are kind of like the radiator screws. They don't have to be super tight, but tight enough so they will not come loose and they won't rattle. And just get all those tightened down. And our radiator and pump are almost all set up to go back in the case. So we can get this tightened. And then we can go ahead and put this to the side because we don't need this just quite yet. But let's grab the case again and grab our motherboard with our newly cleaned CPU and the CPU cooler backing plate installed. And then this, you're just going to have to kind of angle in. And it should be fairly easy, but sometimes it's hard to get the motherboard standoffs lined up with the case. And you'll know you're lined up when you can see the threads for the case. So let's go ahead and get all of these 8 screws back in. And then same thing with these. They just have to be pretty tight. They don't have to be super tight, but just a good hand snug so the motherboard isn't loose. All right, so we got all of those tightened. And now we're going to go ahead and plug in all of our connections. So there is the CPU power. There is our rear fan. And on my board, that is labeled the system fan header. And then now we're going to do all of these connections in the right. And I'm going to go ahead and show this picture again, but just make sure you have a before picture of this so you don't get confused as to where these plug in. Lots of before pictures, guys. Most of these connections only go in one way, so just keep note of how they are and you should be completely fine. So we went ahead and got the 24 pin down there, and now we're sliding back in our Wi-Fi card. And like I said, guys, your antenna may come loose on this because they're just held in with 2 little snap pieces. So if they come loose, you will have to reconnect them. So now let's go ahead and grab our pump and radiator and fan, and then make sure you keep the cover on because you do not want the pre-applied thermal paste touching anything or getting smeared. And then let's go ahead and secure the bracket to the top of the case with those 2 screws. And then I try to screw the bracket in right here, but you can see the rear fan actually gets in my way. So in a second, I cut away here to after the rear fan was removed because I just did not have space to get it. So you can see with the fan removed, I have enough room to secure the back screw. And we're going to go ahead and get that tight. And then we're going to move on to the front one. And then we're going to get that one tight. So you can see that doesn't wiggle. So now we've got our 4-pin from the radiator fan, and that is going to go into your CPU fan header slot. And then now let's go ahead and grab our pump and remove the little cover and just make sure you don't touch thermal paste. And what we're going to do is place the pump down on the 4 posts. And then once the pump is down, you just want to make sure you keep pressure on the pump. Not a ton, but you just don't want the pump to break contact with the CPU, because if the pump ends up coming up, then you're most likely going to have to reapply thermal paste. So now we're going to grab these 4, the grayish looking screws, and then we're just going to secure these on the 4 posts to kind of keep the pump down. So now that I've got 3 in right here and they're all pretty hand snug, I can go ahead and eventually remove my hand because the pump is fully seated. So let's get the last one. And then these ones, you're going to want to grab a Phillips head screwdriver and tighten all 4 of these down. And once again, just a good snug. They don't have to be super duper tight, but tight enough. You can kind of see I'm just doing it with 3 fingers here. So that's in place. Let's go ahead and take the little clear plastic off the pump. And then now we've got our 3-pin, and that's going to go into the LC pump header, and it's only going to go in one way. You see those notches on the connector? They only go in one way, and you'll find you cannot really screw this up. So now we're going to go ahead and grab our SATA connector, and we're going to plug that into your available SATA power. So now let's go ahead and kind of push all these cables up and get them out of the way. Do a little bit of cable management here. So now I'm going to go ahead and put my rear fan back in. And I just showed you the arrow on there, and that's just showing that it's an exhaust fan, because I have 1 intake fan down below, and then the radiator and the rear fan are both exhaust. So let's get all 4 of those screws nice and tight. And then get the connector plugged into the system fan. So let's go ahead and get our GPU back in, and the tab on the motherboard should already be down, but just in case, make sure it is down before installing. And what you're going to do is just push it in, and you'll see the tab actually locks into place. So now we're going to install the 2 rear screws that secure the GPU to the case. And this one, I thought I was cross-threading, threading the screw in incorrectly. So you can see I remove it right here. And I just wanted to make sure it did not go in crooked. So I go ahead and get that tight. And you want to do your sag bracket next before installing the connectors. So let's grab that 1 screw that secures it, plug that back in, and then now we can go ahead and get our GPU connectors. And that's going to do it for the install. All right, guys, the install is done, and the computer booted up with no issues, and the AIO looks fantastic. And this is currently the 2nd benchmark I've done, and we got about, what did that say? Got about 2 minutes left in this one, and so far my average temperature has been around 72 to 73 degrees. So I'm really happy with the temps that this AIO is providing, and it's way better than the stock cooler. And I do like how the AIO looks. And a few notes about this AIO is the white lights on the pump are not changeable, even with the Corsair IQ software. So you are stuck with the bright white, unfortunately. It doesn't look bad. It looks pretty cool. And one thing I kind of didn't like is the case lighting is shining off of the radiator, which doesn't look fantastic, but it is what it is. I'll take the performance that it's providing over the aesthetics, but it looks great. Stress test turned out fantastic. And yeah, I think that's going to do it for the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it was informative. And leave a comment down below whether you like the looks of the AIO in this one or the Noctua U9S I had before. Well, that's going to do it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoyed it, please hit the like button. And if you're enjoying my content, please consider hitting the subscribe button. And if you have any questions or concerns about anything I went through in the video, please leave a comment down below. And please let me know whether you prefer the look of the 120mm AIO or the Noctua U9S that I ran for months. Both perform very similarly, but have much different looks. So let me know which one you guys like better. Well, once again, guys, thank you so much for watching. And I hope you guys have a great day. And I'll see y'all in the next video.